Yes, there it is. Now it's going. All right, folks. So just as we were talking, I was telling you guys we're in first period. You want to say hi? Want to say hi, everybody? Say hi. Say hi. Yeah, there you go. Hi. There you go. So we thank you for being so exciting as usual. Excellent. So we're gonna move along with our discussion of the Passion and Holy Week. All right. We have a test tomorrow, so don't forget that. Right. Christ the teacher, beginning the end, and everything that we get through on the sheet, probably through Good Friday, is for our test tomorrow. Okay, does that make sense? Right. So when we left off last week, it seems like forever ago that we were in class together. We watched the Passion, right? The video of the Passion. We watched the agony in the garden on Thursday. Right, that scene when Jesus is arrested by the Jewish leaders and brought before the Jewish leaders for trial. Okay, that's pretty much where we got through. We didn't get too much of that trial, right? But what happens is the Jewish leaders on Holy Thursday night find Jesus guilty. What was the crime? Anybody know what the crime is that the Jewish leaders find Jesus guilty of, Miss Riley? Of blasphemy. Very good, right? Blasphemy is what? What is blasphemy, guys? What is blasphemy, Chase? Speaking some untruth about God, right? So the fact that Jesus claimed to be God, claimed to be the Son of God, that was the claim that was blasphemous, right? That nobody could claim to be the Son of God. And so they sentenced him to death, right? The problem with this is what? That the Jewish leaders don't have the ability to actually carry out the death penalty, right? You guys remember this? We learned this all the way back when we introed the New Testament, right? Because Rome is in charge, Romans are the only ones that can kill people, right? So that means that although the Jewish leaders have found him guilty of blasphemy, right? Jesus claimed that he is the Son of God. He needs to get the Roman governor in charge, right, involved to try to actually put Jesus to death, all right? So what happens, right? Jesus is going to be brought before Pontius Pilate, right? So let's jump back to our actual text here, folks, right? If you don't mind, we did Peter's denial in front of the charcoal fire, okay, right? And so what happens is the Jewish leaders bring Jesus before Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate finds Jesus innocent. Does that make sense, right? He finds him innocent. He's like, this guy's done nothing wrong. This guy's done nothing that deserves the death penalty. But because Pontius Pilate is afraid of the crowd, right, he's going to send Jesus to Herod. Now, if you guys remember all the way back when we introed the Gospels, right, Jesus was from Galilee, which is that northernmost province. Herod, right, was the ruler of Galilee. And because it was the Passover, he happened to just be in Jerusalem visiting. And so Pontius Pilate is going to send Jesus to Herod because he's like, well, he's really his responsibility since he's from there, right? So since he's here, I'll let Herod be the bad guy and condemn this guy to death, hopefully, right? So Pontius Pilate sends Jesus to Herod. Herod is like, great, this is fantastic. I've always wanted to meet this guy. But he finds Jesus innocent also, right? Herod also finds Jesus innocent, all right? It says he questioned him at length, but Jesus gave him no answers, right? And so in verse 11, even Herod and his soldiers treated him contemptuously, mocked him, and after clothing him in a resplendent garb, he sends him back to Pilate, right? So he kind of mocks Jesus. He puts him in like a purple cloak, like, oh, you're the king of the Jews? Okay, great, here's a purple cloak, but go back to Pontius Pilate because I don't find you guilty of any major crime to actually kill you. Does that make sense? And that's where Pilate and Jesus have this conversation, right? And the conversation between Pilate and Jesus, I always think is important for us to note, right? So in verse 29, let's skip to verse 33, right? So it says, so Pilate went back. We're in section, just for everyone on the video, section 60. Section 60, right? All right, we're going to look at verse 33 here. So it says, Pilate went back into the praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? And finally Jesus answers, right? You notice Jesus hadn't answered Herod before this. He wasn't answering the Sanhedrin. He wasn't speaking to the charge. Let's you know what Jesus says in verse 35. Do you say this on your own, or have others told you about me? And Pilate answered, I am not a Jew. Am I? Your own nation and chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done? And Jesus answered, my kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom did belong to this world, my attendants would be keeping me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not here. So Pilate said to him, then you are a king. And Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. And then what Pontius Pilate says in response, verse 38, I find is very important. He says to him, what is truth? Right? In the Latin, it is quid est veritas. Right? What is truth? Right? And if we're looking at our sheet, because you have that split screen, right? That is right here. Quid est veritas. What is truth? Right? And I think that's an important question for you guys to answer in your life, right? Like, that's the mission that we're on. We, in our lives, are on the mission to search for and to find out the truth, right? What is true, right? Our world is plagued by what we call relativism. You guys know what relativism is? Anybody know? It's a philosophical mindset. Anybody know? Relativism is the belief that, like, well, I'm right and you're right. We can both be right, but disagree. Does that make sense? Right? Like, how could that be the case? How could that be the case? Right? There is a truth, right? There is a truth. Either God is real or he's not. He can't be real because I believe him to be real, but Sienna doesn't believe him to be real, so he's not real. Right? Like, that doesn't make sense. Right? He either exists or he doesn't exist. Right? Like, I can't say he does and she says he doesn't and both be right. One of us has to be wrong. But relativism seeks to say, no, we're both right. It's our belief that creates him. It's what brings him into existence, is our belief in him. Right? And that's the problem. And that, I think, is what Pontius Pilate is getting at here. He's saying, like, what is truth? Right? What is truth? Right? What is, like, the capital T truth? Right? And that's what we have to seek out in our life. We have to answer that question. Okay? So, what happens? Right? Pilate is looking for a way out. He's looking for a way out. And so there was a tradition amongst Pontius Pilate and the Jewish people that every year at the Feast of Passover, he would release to them a criminal. Right? Someone who had been arrested by Rome in a show of good faith, right, between the Romans and the people, that on your feast day we will release you somebody that we have arrested, right? As a way to show, like, hey, we're in this thing together. Right? And so the choice that Pontius Pilate gives to the people is to release this man named Barabbas. Barabbas. Right? And you know it says he was a robber. He wasn't a robber. He was a murderer. So cross that out. That's a mistake. He's a murderer. Right? He was a bad guy. Right? If the Romans have him arrested as a murderer, that probably means that he murdered Roman soldiers. So this is why he's arrested. Right? He's a revolutionary. Right? Now, this is also an interesting detail here. Notice the name Barabbas. Anybody recognize a word inside the name Barabbas that you should have recognized? Yeah? Abba. Very good. Abba. What does the word Abba mean? Father. Very good, right? Now, does anybody know what the root bar means? We saw this one time. Jesus refers to Peter as Peter Bar Jonah. Anybody know? Son of. Very good, right? So, holy moly, guys. Take a look at this. Right? Barabbas, his name literally means son of the Father. So the people are given the choice between releasing Barabbas, the son of the Father, or the true son of the Father, son of God in Jesus Christ. Right? They're given the choice between releasing, right, Jesus, the true son of the Father, the second person of the Holy Trinity, or this false son of the Father in Barabbas, who had followed the ways of the world, who is a murderer, who's guilty of all these crimes. Right? So there's a choice that the people are given to between these two sons of the Father. And which one do they choose? Which one are they going to choose? Obviously, because we know the end of the story. Jesus doesn't get released, so they choose who? Anybody? Come on. Barabbas. Thank you in the back, right? They choose Barabbas. Right? They scream Barabbas. You guys ever go to, like, Palm Sunday Mass? Right? And we read the story of the trial of Jesus, right? And if you're there, like, your role in that whole gospel reading is to scream out Barabbas, right? Like Barabbas, release Barabbas, right? And so the people are like, we want to release Barabbas. So go back to our text here, folks. All right? Right? And so they say, do you want us to release Barabbas? Right? And they say, yes. Right? And so they're like, well, what do you want us to do with Jesus? And they say, crucify him. And Pontius Pilate's like, what? You want me to crucify this guy? This guy's done nothing wrong. You want me to kill this guy? And so he is going to say, no, I'm not going to have him crucified. Instead, in chapter 19 of John's Gospel, it says he's going to have him scourged. Well, he's going to have him scourged. Okay? You guys know what scourging is? Abby does. Yeah? You want to give us a... Sure, she says it's when you whip someone. But it's like whipping on steroids, guys. If you turn the page here, I have an image, right, of the whip that they would have used, right? They called it the cat o' nine tails, right? So it wasn't just one whip. It was, think of it like a stick, right, that had many pieces of leather or rope on the end of it. And at the end of each one of those pieces of leather, they would have attached rocks, bones, or glass to it, with the intention that when it's whipped, it would grab onto your flesh and literally rip the flesh from your body. Right? This was meant to be painful. It was meant to be torturous. It was meant to be excruciating, right? And for some criminals, this was their method of death, right? They would just scourge you until you died, right? And so because Pontius Pilate doesn't want to kill him, but is looking to send the message that he's looking to appease the crowd, he's going to have Jesus scourged, right? He's going to have him scourged. If you continue to watch that movie of The Passion of the Christ, this scene is particularly troublesome to watch, right? You can't imagine the pain, right, that this would have inflicted, right? And the Roman soldiers were very good at what they did, right? Oftentimes what they would do is the Roman soldiers would get themselves drunk, right? They would become inebriated, so that they weren't really quite grasping the magnitude of what they were doing to this other human person while they scourged them, right? And to Jesus' case, not to death, but just terrible things. All right. It all says in verse 2 here, and the soldiers weave a crown out of thorns and they place it on his head. Right? So these aren't like the little thorn bushes that we have here in Long Island, right? Or like the little rose bush that you see behind. These are like big old like Middle Eastern thorns, like 2-inch thorns, right? Almost like nails, right? And they weave it out of this bush, right? And they press it into his skull, right? Yeah, it's wild, right? They put a purple cloak on him, right? And they begin to spit at him and mock him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," right? So we've said this before. Jesus not only goes the physical torture, but also the emotional, the spiritual torture, the mental anguish of being mocked, being ridiculed, being abandoned by your friends. Like every possible human suffering that you could endure, Jesus endures through his passion. All right? And so what happens then? Let's go back to our handout, our notes. All right, so it's over here. Right. Once Jesus is scourged, right, Pontius Pilate brings Jesus back out to the crowd, hoping that their thirst for blood would be appeased. And he uses the Latin phrase ecce homo, which means behold the man, right? Behold the man, right? Kind of like look, this is what you've asked for. Behold the man, right? Hoping that he would get the people to release him. But unfortunately, the people are only going to cry for the sounds of crucifixion even louder, right? And so, if we can go back to our notes, verse 61. Oh, sorry, we were already in 61. All right. I think is it over here? Yeah, no, it's not. Yeah, right. It says, verse 24, when Pilate saw that he was not succeeding at all, but that a riot was breaking out, he took water and washed his hands in the sight of the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. Look to it yourself. Right? And so Pilate will wash his hands, so to speak, right? Of Jesus. Now it's symbolic, right? It's symbolic, saying like, I find this man to be innocent. I do not want his blood on my hands. But what's the problem with this, guys? What's the problem with this? Yeah, you're not. You're Pontius Pilate. You're not innocent, right? Like you have the power to say, no, I'm not going to give in, and yet you are not holding on to that. You are a coward. You are afraid. And so while he's claiming to be able to wash his hands of the blood of Jesus, you can't, right? He has a responsibility to uphold the truth and to protect it, and yet he doesn't. And he doesn't. Right? And the reality is, if you look right here in the middle of this Catholic faith facts, right, that even though Pontius Pilate washed his hands, like, he is known as, like, throughout all of history, not for any of the things that he did in Jerusalem as a good leader, but for this one action, right? We proclaim in the creed that he suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, and was buried, right? And so he, in a sense, like he is reminded of this, right? He was innocent, and yet he condemns him to death anyways, right? So notice verse 15, right? Shall I crucify your king? The chief priest answered, we have no king but Caesar. Then he handed him over to them to be crucified. Right? He gives in to the crowd. All right. So let's go back to our handout. All right. The way of the cross. All right. So Jesus would have been forced to carry his cross. Right now, a lot of times in art and in movies, you'll see Jesus carry the entire cross beam, like the whole cross, right? The vertical and the horizontal piece. You've seen images like this, right? Jesus carrying this. But scholars, not me, scholars think that it's more likely he just carried the cross beam, right? They were just the horizontal beam, right? Because the whole thing would have been like 300-400 pounds, right? But the cross beam alone would have been about 100 pounds. All right. So, but think about this, right? Jesus has been scourged. He's extremely weakened. He's bloodied. He's crowned with thorns. And now they're going to take his arms and they're going to tie his arms to this wooden cross, right? To this crossbeam to force him to carry it, right? Now, what's the problem, guys? When your arms are tied like this to a beam and you fall, what's there to catch you? Nothing, right? Your face. Right? You would fall like right on your face. So when we as Catholics, we every single church you go to has the Stations of the Cross. You guys remember that project that you had to do back in the first trimester? You had to go to the church, pick out the artwork. Every church has the Stations of the Cross. And in the Stations, it says Jesus fell 3 times. He probably fell more than that, but just think about that. Every time Jesus falls, there's nothing to catch him but his body that's been torn up with all the open sores from the scourging. Right? Right? On his way, it becomes clear that Jesus is not going to make it to the crucifixion. He's going to die before that. And so the soldiers press into service this man named Simon of Cyrene. He's just a random guy who's on his way home from work. And they force him to come in and help Jesus carry his cross. Right? Now, it's not much known about Simon. Not much knows about whether he was a believer, not a believer, what he does after this. Right? But he's kind of forced into this situation to help Jesus carry his cross to get him there, right? After that, we also see Saint Veronica step in, and she's going to wipe the face of Jesus. She's going to take her veil off her head, and she'll wipe the face of Jesus, right? And what's pretty cool about this is that when Jesus wipes his face with the blood, he leaves on her veil an imprint of his face in blood on her veil. Right? This is the one they're working out there. Okay? Right? Which is, imagine you come in from like a soccer game, your face is all muddy and wet, and you wipe your face on a towel. Like, is it going to look like you? No, right? So Jesus has this miracle occur where he wipes his face with the blood, and that was the face. And you could go, I believe they have the veil in France, right? You could go and visit. You can go and see it, which is pretty cool, right? I believe it's in France. I've never seen it, but that's what I've been told. Okay? All right. And so Jesus is going to walk, right, from in the interior of Jerusalem, right, all the way to the place where they're going to crucify him. Right, the route that Jesus would have taken, right, the road through Jerusalem is what we call the Via Dolorosa. Right, the Via Dolorosa. And so if we go back to our textbook, right, you can see that up here. Right, it's called the Way of Sorrow. Okay, it's the route by which Jesus is going to kind of carry his cross on the way. Okay. Now, all this was done publicly, guys. It was done publicly because the Romans, right, the way they operated was in a way to embarrass you, right? To embarrass you, to make this so that it was public spectacle, so that no one else would do what you did, right? So this would have been like a public parade, so to speak, of people that were about to be killed. All right. All right, section 63, right, when they get to the place of the skull. So if we're looking here now, the crucifixion. All right, the place where they crucified Jesus, right, has different names. It depends on the language that we're using, right? The Greek term for it was the skull, right? In Latin, it was called Calvary. In Aramaic, which was the spoken language, it was called Golgotha, right? And if you remember all this going back to the Old Testament, it was Mount Moriah, right? Which is the same place where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac 2,000 years earlier. I remember they traveled for 3 days to get to this very site. And so here they are, back on Mount Moriah. Okay? And so they would have crucified Jesus between two thieves, right? There's two thieves, one on his left and one on his right. Okay, so what is actual crucifixion, right? Just so you know, here Jesus would have been nailed to the cross, right? So oftentimes in pictures, right, they have the nail going through the palm of your hands, right, and through your feet. But that's actually probably not likely. It would probably if you feel your arm here, folks, if you feel your arm, right, there are two bones that go on your arm right here, and if you were to feel right in between there, you'll feel that's probably where they put the nail, right through there. Right, because it would allow your body to lock in on the nails and to hang, right? And then they would have put your feet on top and then put a nail right through those tops of your feet, right? Anybody know the cause of death in crucifixion? This is gory stuff. Isabella? Sure. It's not called suffocation, though. It's so close, right? It's called asphyxiation. Does that make sense, right? You're hanging there, and all the weight of your body is on your rib cage, right? And so you can't breathe. So the only way to breathe is to pull up on the nails that are in your wrists and to push up on the nails in your feet to release the pressure on your rib cage in order to get that breath. So it's a very shallow breath, right? Scientists say that it's probably the most excruciating way to die, crucifixion, right? Because you have, the pain of your wrists. But there's also just like slow, short, shallow breaths until you just become so exhausted where you can't push up anymore, and you die because you asphyxiate. You can't. It's like suffocating or drowning out of water. Horrible stuff. Horrible stuff. All right. So back to those two thieves. Jesus is crucified between two thieves. All right. There's a thief on his right and a thief on his left. Right. Commonly referred to as the good thief and the bad thief. That's kind of like a contradiction in terms. How could you have a good thief, right? It's because while on the cross, the good thief is going to come to Jesus' protection, right? His name is commonly referred to as Dismas. That's the name of the good thief, right? And so while they're there, the one thief starts to kind of curse Jesus. The bad thief curses Jesus and says basically, like, if you are who they say you are, then take yourself down from this cross and take us with you. And Dismas kind of comes to his rescue, right? And will say, like, be quiet. Leave him alone. He's innocent. right? And he'll ask Jesus for mercy. We'll take a look at that more in the words of Jesus from the cross, right? They'll also hang a sign above Jesus' head, right? You guys, have you ever seen INRI? Like above a crucifix anywhere? You ever seen this, right? It's Latin, right? So in the Latin language, there's no J. So it would have been I, right? So it would be Jesum Nazareorum Rex Judaeorum, right? That was what it would have been, okay? It literally meant Jesus Nazareth, King of the Jews. Right? Jesus Nazareth, King of the Jews. That's what INRI stands. Right? That's our abbreviation. But that's the charge. That's the way to do, right? Crucifixion was a public spectacle. It was a way to get people to not do that behavior anymore. So they would hang the charge for why you're being crucified above your head or around your neck. This way anybody who walked past the crucifixion would read the sign like, great, guess I don't want to do that, because that's what happened to that guy. Right? It was a form of public humiliation. Okay? There at the foot of the cross are John, Mary, and Mary Magdalene. Right? Out of all the apostles, the only one that shows up is John. Judas has killed himself. Right? So out of the other 11 that are left, the only one who's brave enough to go is John. I think that's fascinating. John's the youngest. He's like 14, 15 years old. He's your age. Right? He's the only one with the passion, with the courage, with the guts to stand up for Jesus and to put himself in potential harm's way by going there to support him through all this. All right, we'll look a little bit about the conversation in a second with the 7 last words. All right? So what happens? Right? Jesus hangs on the cross for 3 hours, from 12 until 3. From 12 until 3. Right? And because it's the eve of the Passover, the Jewish leaders come and ask Pontius Pilate to break the legs of all the men on the cross, the 2 criminals and Jesus, so that their bodies are not there overnight to kind of hasten their death. Right? Think about it. If you're on the cross and you have to pull up on your hands and push up on your legs, right? That's how you breathe. Right? If you break your legs, well, now all of a sudden there's no way for me to push up, and I would die very, very quickly. All right? So what do? They would come and they break the legs of the 2 thieves, right? And then when they come to Jesus, they find that he's already dead. And so rather than breaking his bones, right, we'll talk about the Passover lamb in a second, right? Rather than break his bones, a soldier, one of the centurions, is going to pierce his heart with a lance, right? So they take a spear and they thrust it up under his ribs and they pierce his heart. Now, in this type of death, congestive heart failure, all the blood and water in your body would have rushed to your heart. And so there, right, comes forth, right, this Eucharistic image, right? Blood and water flows forth from his side, right? And so Jesus dies. All right? Very good. So just to go back here, folks, we'll take a look at this. Oh, let's look at this. The Passover. Right, and then we'll look probably on Thursday at the words of Jesus himself. Right, there's this chart here in section 63 that I think is very important. It won't be on your test tomorrow, but I still think it's important for us to be aware of. Right, remember we talked about this is why we studied the Old Testament. Right? The Old Testament, right, the Passover, original Passover was, right, the sacrifice of this lamb, the blood of the lamb put on the doorpost that saves the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. How is Jesus the new Passover lamb? Guys, just look at the 2 things. It's one for one. It's side by side. Like, this is not a coincidence. Like it goes all the way down to Jesus is being killed on the cross at the same time as the lambs who are being killed in the temple. Like, remarkable stuff. All right, so we'll leave off there, folks. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for coming. I know you have your choice of scripture class always. Thank you for choosing mine. Have a wonderful day.